As the year draws to a close, this is a good time to do some self-reflection and analyze, okay, what worked well in my writing life this last year? Now, the reason why we're looking backwards is really so we can look forwards, right? We're trying to look to the future and figure out what can I change for next year in order to be a better writer, in order to write more, in order to write better, in order to help my career flourish. So I'm gonna do a video soon on writing goals, and I'll link to that when it comes out. But at least for this video, we need to look backwards at this previous year and look at what went well this year for you, what went badly, and what can you change. What I'm gonna do is walk you through 14 questions that you should be asking yourself to figure out how this last year went, right? Because if we don't ask ourselves these questions, it's really easy to fall in ruts and just do the same exact thing year after year after year, and you're really spinning your wheels and not getting anywhere. So let's start with question number one. What was the best risk you took as a writer last year? Now, a risk could be anything from starting a new novel to writing in a different genre to joining a new writing group. You have to figure out what were the places where you stepped out and tried something new this year, something that felt a little bit risky to you. And then what I want you to do is to ask yourself, did I take enough risk this year? Because what I find when I talk to writers is often they're playing it a little bit safe. You know, they're writing in genres that they know really well. They keep on doing the same things that they've been doing, even if it's not working well. So after you identify those areas in your writing life over the last year where you did take some sort of risk, then it's probably time to look forward and be like, okay, what do I want to do for this next year? How can I take risks in this upcoming year to make my writing life even better? I mean, go ahead, think of reading double the amount of books that you read last year, or starting a new book club, or think about trying to write a book that is very ambitious that you're not sure you can actually pull off. That's a very risky move. 2, what was the best dollar you spent on writing this last year? Did you go to a conference? Did you hire an editor? Did you join a writing group? Did you pay for an online course? Did you hire a nanny so you actually had time to write? I mean, I don't know. Whatever it is, think, where did I spend my money on writing this year? Maybe your wrist was really hurting from writing, so you bought like a carpal tunnel wrist protector or something. It doesn't have to be anything profound, but I think it's really useful to think about where you're allocating your funds, even if you have very few funds, right? I mean, if you're going to the used library book sale and buying books, and those books end up inspiring you to write your novel, then that's money well spent. And as an exercise, what I want you to do is to think, how can I spend money in a different way or a more effective way in this upcoming year? And once again, the amount of money doesn't matter, right? This could be $50 we're talking about for the year, or it could be $10,000 we're talking about. I don't know your situation, but what I'm encouraging us to do is to think of money as a means by which you can improve your writing career. And if you really want to develop as a writer, then you have to be devoting some kind of money to it, right? It can't be completely budgetless. Maybe you just want to save up some money so that you can buy a good cover designer when you publish your book. That's great, right? So you could be, I want to save for when I do publish. Maybe you're saving up money for a copy editor or something like that. Or maybe saving up money for advertising. I don't know, whatever it is, come up with a plan for how you can spend money in a way that helps your writing career. The third question that I want you to ask yourself is, where did you spend your time wisely last year? And what I mean is, was there a particular month when you got a ton of writing done? Great. Okay, so what I want you to do is figure out what were the conditions that allowed you to be so productive that month? And can you replicate those conditions and do that again in this upcoming year? Did you go on a writing retreat somewhere, even if it's in like a friend's closet somewhere, just to get away a little bit from life so you're in a new environment and you can actually concentrate on the book you want to write? Do you feel like you devoted enough time to reading this last year, right? Reading is the fertilizer out of which your own books will grow. So if you're not putting enough fertilizer in your imagination, it's often difficult to know the right moves when it comes to writing your own novel. And I think it's also useful to think about the opposite of this question. Not where you spent your time wisely, but also where you squandered your time this year. Did you devote too much time to social media or to video games or to watching television and movies? Maybe you spent thousands of hours on fantasy football. And there's nothing wrong with any of these things, right? You just want to evaluate your own life and say, okay, here's how I'm using my time. Does that reflect my actual priorities? If you say like, oh, I really want to publish a book, and yet the amount of time you're devoting to it is minuscule, then do you really have a goal to publish a book, or is it more like a dream or a wish? And once again, once you evaluate your time over this last year. You can figure out how you want to differently allocate your time for the next year. Question number 4. How did you develop friendships with other writers this year? Listen, these could be online relationships, they could be in-person relationships, but it's absolutely key for your writing life to develop friendships, a network of people that you can trust to give feedback on your book, that you can reach out to when you need a blurb, that provides a community of fellow writers to buoy you up during those dark nights of the soul. Man, one of my best writing friends I met on Twitter, right? We just started corresponding on Twitter, and guess what? We've been friends for 15 years now. So some of it's serendipity, right? You just happen into a friendship and voila. But it's really, really key to put yourself out there and to be trying to build friendships. For another friend of mine, we originally met because I posted a review of his book on my blog, and it was a very glowing review. I really enjoyed it. He reached out, said thanks for the review. Hey, do you want to meet up? Because I'm going to be in your area. That was like 10 years ago. We've kept in contact. We've helped each other out at conferences and whatnot. That's the way that writing friendships develop. And I should also say that sometimes friendships come from out of the blue emailing an author. If you read a book that isn't a super famous book, but more of like a mid-tier or small press book or something, the author would love it if you emailed them. And guess what? Sometimes a friendship develops out of that. And if nothing happens of it, then that's fine too, right? This isn't transactional. At least you told an author you love their book, and that brightened their day. 5. What did you do last year that you need to stop? Every writer has some bad habits, and maybe you're thinking about yours right now. It could be that you're super jealous of someone who is in your writing group and they went on to big success and 6-figure deals and movies and voila, and you're like stewing in anger thinking, why couldn't that be me? I think I'm a better writer than they are. Maybe you need to cut down on self-criticism. Is there a voice inside your head telling you, I'm a terrible writer, I'm a terrible writer, I'm a terrible writer? You need to figure out a way to silence that voice and speak into your talents as an author. So whatever your error is, like, you need to be able to name it and say, look, I need to stop doing this if I'm going to flourish as a writer. And a great idea is to create like a swear jar, where you create a jar and every single time you make that mistake, you put $1 in there. And then later on you say, I'm going to use this money to do what? Like go to a writing conference, buy a writing course, something like that. 6. What was the best advice about writing that you received this year? I find this question to be really useful because if you can't think of one, then either you're not getting any instruction about writing, which is a problem. Hopefully all of you are watching this video, so maybe you think of one of my videos as being good advice that you received this year. I hope. But if you are receiving advice about writing and yet nothing springs to mind, I think the problem is you are not reflecting enough on the wisdom that you received. And so a good way to solve this problem is to start a writing journal. A writing journal is simply a journal that's devoted solely to advice about writing. Something that you heard, something that you read, something that you realized when you were watching a movie that teaches you how to write better fiction. And a writing journal is key because not only does it help you remember that thing better when you write it down, you'll also be able to look through it and go back and realize, oh wow, look at all the stuff I realized this year. Look how far I came over this last year and what I learned. 7. What was your biggest writing success? I am a firm believer in naming your successes. If you don't name your success, well, for one, you can get too disappointed, right? You'll be like, my career is a disaster, da da da. Instead of focusing on, okay, what's going well? It could be a really small success, like you wrote half of a book. Okay, that's not a small success. That's actually a big success. But whatever your success is, you need to name those things and be like, this is what I did this year. Maybe you met a new writing friend. Maybe you read a bunch of books that inspire your novel. Maybe you published your book and got feedback from readers. I always love hearing from readers. That's such an encouraging thing as an author. But if you write down your top 3, your top 5 writing successes this last year, then you can figure out, okay, do I want to go further with all those successes in this upcoming year? Or do I want to maybe change registers and work on a different thing to find success in this year? Number 8, what was your biggest writing failure this last year? It could be that you just didn't devote any time to writing your book. It could be that you didn't read enough. It could be that you started going to a group and then stopped going because you were too afraid to show people your work. It could be that you didn't go to a conference. Now, I understand there's all sorts of different times when you can't get away for one reason or another. It could be money, it could be kids, it could be any sort of thing that gets in the way, right? Life gets in the way. Jeez. Yeah, but you need to identify for yourself, where did you fall short this last year? What didn't go well? And what do you want to change for this upcoming year? Do you want to keep plugging away at the same book, or do you want to pivot and try something different? Did you not read any books on the writing craft this last year? Well, I have an easy solution for that. Read The Linchpin Writer, it'll help you out. Still, I think if you name your failures over this last year, it'll go a long way in helping you avoid making those same mistakes for the upcoming year. 9, what was your most pleasurable reading experience this year? I think you want to identify this for a few different reasons. 1, figuring out what gives you the most pleasure tells you the type of books you should be writing. Often, what you enjoy reading the most is what you want to mimic or recreate on the page. 2, I think it's a great strategy to take the book that you enjoyed most and devote a lot of time to it. Take it apart, piece by piece. Figure out how they worked their magic to make you feel those strong emotions. I bet you'll come up with a lot of tips and tricks that you can use in your own writing. And here's a little psychological trick that I like to use. When you are struggling to write, and it could be writer's block, it could be time, it could be any number of reasons, what I want you to do is lie down and take a second to think about the pleasure that you received from a particular story. Close your eyes, just imagine that pleasure. I find, at least, that reminiscing inspires me to want to do that sort of emotional impact in my own work. And so I'm like, okay, time to get up, time for me to go write. Let's do it. Number 10, what was your worst reading experience this year? Think of the book that you hated this year. I think that's really useful to identify. Why didn't you like that book? What can you learn from it? I have been reading cruise ship novels because my novel that I'm sending out to agents is set entirely upon a cruise ship. And I recently read a cruise ship novel. I'm not going to tell you which one it was, but it ended in a very ambiguous, right in the middle of the story type of ending, which I'm not opposed to as a strategy. Like sometimes that really works. For this book, it didn't work. And I looked up the Goodreads reviews and it was dismal. They were really bad. And it was honestly like a pretty great novel until that ending. And that reading experience and the feedback from other readers really helped me to understand, like, okay, that's not something I want to do with my own book. No ambiguous ending for me. Like, I want to wrap things up. I want to close the storytelling loops and make people feel satisfied with the ending of the story. Another terrible book I read recently was a Billy Collins collection of poetry. And I realized, oh, okay, like I like poetry as a genre, but I actually hate Billy Collins. It was like a collection of all the worst cliches you could possibly imagine about poetry. Anyhow, if you identify what went wrong in books that you hated, hopefully it will help you avoid those same mistakes in your own fiction. 11, when did you have the most fun as a writer this year? It could be something as simple and easy as the time you spent sitting at a desk imagining stuff. That's great. It could be when you drew up an outline for a new novel. That was like, it really got you excited. Awesome. It could be time you spent at a conference or a workshop or an online group. Wonderful. Like, name that thing. Figure out what it was for you. I think it's really important to figure out how you experience joy as a writer, because it tells you going forward how to structure your life in a way that gives you more joy. Now, there are certain things you can't avoid, right? Like if you don't enjoy the process of actually writing, I don't know what to do for you there. But I mean, hopefully at some points when you're really in the flow, when you're really going for it, you enjoy that flow. I guess what I'm saying with this though is not to buy into the myth that the best writers are always brooding and depressed and woe is me sort of perspectives. I would go toward joy, toward pleasure, figure out what you love the most, and do that rather than feeling obligated to do anything else because someone told you had to write that way or someone told you had to live the writing life this way. 12, what did you learn about yourself as a writer last year? I think self-knowledge is really important when it comes to the writing life. Well, I mean, self-knowledge is important in all categories. I think it's just really important to have those revelations in your writing life where you learn, oh, this is how I work best. This is what I should do going forward. It's important to know your writing strengths. It's important to know your writing weaknesses. So if you don't know those, like take some time and evaluate what those are. I do think if you keep a list in your writing journal, which all of you are going to start now, that you'll have a better sense of, oh, look at this weakness I used to have and I've improved it. I've done the work to try to get better at that thing. I'm so much better than I was. You'll be able to look back years later and say, oh, this is the ladder that I took. This is the journey that I was on to continually get better at my craft. There are 2 questions left to evaluate your year. Number 13, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied satisfied are you with your writing this year? Did you have a great year? Did you get a lot done? Maybe you did a great outline. Maybe you started a few first chapters. Maybe you got some pieces published in magazines or newspapers or something. Think about every single category of your writing life and just sort of write down, all right, here's the progress that I made in my life this year. Because otherwise, I find that the writing progress that we make seems to be kind of invisible. You reach the end of the year and you're like, what did I do this year? You look at all the things you didn't accomplish. And really what you should be doing is taking some time to focus on the things that you did accomplish. I mean, maybe your writing year was so-so, right? Maybe you'd rate it a 5 out of 10 or something. But even a 5 out of 10, there are certain successes that you had through this year. And if you rated it something dismal like a 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 or something, okay, why is that? Like, what happened to make it a 1 or 2 out of 10? And how can you change things so next year you can rate it a 7 out of 10? And lastly, number 14, did you accomplish your writing goals for the year? If you're like me, sometimes your writing goals are a bit too ambitious and you sort of never accomplish them, but still it gives you something to shoot for. I hope that you made perfect writing goals that like you can stretch for, but they're still attainable. I think it's great to have reading goals, writing goals, publishing goals, side project goals, meaning like, oh, I want to get an article written and send it off to this sort of magazine. If you did write down your goals, that's wonderful. You should always write down your writing goals, by the way, so you can look back and be like, oh, that's what I was thinking at the beginning of the year. I don't know what I was thinking, but at least I accomplished, half of what I wrote down. And I'm going to talk about setting writing goals a lot more in the next video, so stay tuned for that one.